Hello and welcome to our deep dive into Parshat Teruma, and I'm delighted to have with me Rabbi Tvi Grumet, who is a master educator and teacher of Tanakh. Dr. Rabbi Grumet has been teaching Tanakh for four decades, and he's currently the director of education at the Lookstein Center in Bar-Ilan University, where he's the editor-in-chief of the Jewish Educational Leadership. He's also published many articles and many books, including Moshe and the Path to Leadership. So I'm delighted to have you with us. And I know you're battling a cold, so I'm particularly grateful for your kindness in doing this mitzvah of sharing your thoughts on the Torah with us. So I wanted to just jump straight into it, and this parasha is the introduction to all the vessels of the temple. The temple being, the home that we humans create for God. And my question is, how can a finite human create a house for an infinite God? Are we just kidding ourselves, or is there something deeper to this?
So we're not creating a house for God. And I think that Hashem was sort of aware of the challenge himself. Shlomo HaMelech was certainly aware of it. He says. He built the Beit HaMikdash, and he knows that, it's not going to really house Hashem. And Hashem is the one who told us to build the Mishkan, which is this temporary, right? Temporary. It lasted for almost 500 years, but it's a temporary dwelling. But Hashem knows that he's not going to live there, so to speak, right? But he's the one who told us to build this. The idea behind it is that we should know it's not a place where Hashem's presence exists, but it is a place for us to know that Hashem's presence is amongst us, and that's huge. For people to feel it's true. It's true in any era, in any time, with any person. One of the most wonderful feelings that a person can have is the sense that Hashem is with them. One of the most devastating experiences that a person can have is the sense that Hashem is not with them. And that's what Hashem wants over here. He wants us to have a sense that he's with us. So he says, create this. And there are a lot of rules and a lot of details and instructions that most people don't understand. Maybe we can speak about some of those. But he sets this up and says, look, I'm doing this so that I will be able to give you a sign that I am amongst you. Hashem's presence is everywhere. The question is, where do we have a very concrete way of sort of sensing that? And that's what the Mishkan really is. It's not where Hashem lives, but where Hashem gives us a sign that he's amongst us.
That's beautiful. I love that, because that's the ultimate purpose of creation, I think, is to know Hashem and to have that temporary dwelling where you had the certain miracles of the signs that were there for all to see is great. But how does it help us today when we don't have that? I mean, what is the alternative for us to that?
So that's a very interesting question, and I don't think there is one answer. Today we don't have a Mishkan anymore. We don't have a Beit HaMikdash, and there are no overt signs from Hashem that he is amongst us, and that's part of the challenge. Truth is, to some extent, maybe it was supposed to be that way. I know that sounds a little bit radical, but I like to use mashal to explain. We have children. We raise our children. When our children are very young, our presence is very, much felt, right? We change their diapers, we feed them, we take care of all of their needs. As they get a little bit older, they learn to become a little bit more independent. They learn to walk. They learn to do things. As parents, one of the great challenges is learning to give them the space to do that. And it's a little bit scary for us sometimes, but we also know that if we don't do that, we're not doing our jobs as parents, right? If we want our children to grow up and really, and really, be healthy, functioning adults, we have to let go. And then when they get older and they grow up and get married and have their own children, so we don't want to be running their lives for them. We don't want to be making their decisions for them. We want them to be making their own decisions. We don't want them to forget us, right? It's nice to get a call. It's nice to get a visit. Is that right? But we want them to really own their own lives. I deeply believe that is exactly what Hashem's relationship with us is. So that when we as a people, when we as humanity were very young, he needed to be in our face a lot. And that's why, for example, you look and Sefer Breshit, Hashem's presence is all over the place, right? But and then when we get to the middle of Sefer Shmot, so you have a number of things, right? Whether you're talking about the 10 plagues in Egypt, you're talking about Kriyat Yamsuf, right? Hashem's presence is very much there. Mm-hmm. And is very much there all throughout our time in the wilderness and until we come into the land and the conquest of Eretz Yisrael. But it's interesting when you take a look at the conquest of Eretz Yisrael, in the beginning, Hashem's presence is right there. He makes the walls of Yericho fall down. And what happens after that? What happens to Hashem's miracles? And Tanakh is very, very clear about this. Hashem doesn't want to be in our face all the time. He wants us to grow up. And the process of growing up means that we become more independent, and that creates different kinds of challenges. One of the kinds of challenges is, okay, so when do I call? Right? When do I call? Do I say, hi, I miss you? How are you doing? There's something I wanted to discuss with you. Right? But I really believe that's the relationship Hashem wants to have with us. He wants us to reach out to him, but he doesn't want to be in our face all the time. If he's in our face all the time, then our reaching out to him becomes meaningless.
That's all very beautiful, and I agree with you totally. But the reality of the fact is that so few of our nation are calling Hashem. So how do you think, how does Hashem respond to that? In one hand, he wants to give us the independence, but the other hand, when we get the independence, the majority of us decide to not call.
So again, I go back to my mashal, right? I have parents with a bunch of kids, and some of them call regularly, and the others don't. And how do they feel? Now, again, I don't think it's fair necessarily to talk about feelings in this way regarding Hashem, and I don't think I'm a little bit hesitant to say things like that. Is Hashem disappointed? Is he frustrated? Maybe, but Hashem has infinite wisdom and infinite patience, and he's hoping for a time when more and more of us will reach out.
Beautiful. So the other thing I wanted to ask your wisdom on is this, that it's although the Parshat Teruma comes before Kitisa, it's clear from the sages that the reason that Hashem gave us the instructions to build the Mishkan was because of our sin of the golden calf. And this is like laden with tremendous potency, this whole idea of the golden calf. It takes us 2,000 years to reach the level of perfection of Adam, and we blew it in 40 days. And the whole question of whether that was a setup or not, could we possibly have have lasted without the golden calf? And if so, is this really what Hashem wanted for us? Or is this a second best option as a result of our failing?
So I'm going to push back on your fundamental assumption. When you said that the sages sort of agree that this happened only in response to the golden calf, first of all, I think Hashem doesn't believe that because he put it in the Torah first. And when you say the sages, that is Rashi's opinion. Rashi's opinion has been popularized and accepted by many, but people don't know that many of the Rishonim disagreed with Rashi. Ramban was the chief fan of Rashi in the Middle Ages, and the Ramban says that Rashi's wrong. He says it more politely than that, but basically he says he doesn't like to say Rashi is wrong, but he says it all the time, right? And then this is one of those cases where Rashi is of the opinion that the Torah is not necessarily written in chronological order, and Ramban says, "How dare you turn God's words backwards?" Hafach divrei Elokim chayim. He undid the words. Hashem told us that the instructions for the Mishkan came before Chet HaEgel. Ramban's understanding of the Mishkan is very profound. And I read the Torah, and to me it's so clear that Ramban is correct. Right? What happened? Ramban says this, and he says this so powerfully. Moshe, so we have Har Sinai, we have a brit, a covenant between Hashem and the Jewish people. They've become partners. That's what the brit is about. That's what the covenant, that's what Har Sinai is all about, is becoming Hashem's partner. It's not about becoming Hashem's slaves. Hashem wants partners. He wants us to be partner with him. And then Ramban says, well, once we became partners, so it's only appropriate that there be a place on this earth where the human partner can meet the divine partner. And that's the Mishkan. And that's why the Mishkan comes immediately afterwards, right? And if you read the Psukim in order, they make perfect sense, right? Well, Rashi does, and he sort of takes the second half of Sefer Shemot, puts it into a food processor, cuts it up into a lot of little pieces and reorganizes it based on some preconceived notion that he had of the way he thinks the Torah should have been written. I like to rely on the way Hashem thought the Torah should have been written. And Hashem wrote it this way for a good reason, right? And the Ramban, he's the great champion of Yesh Mukdam Umuchar B'Torah, that there is chronological order in the Torah with rare exceptions. And the rare exceptions where the Torah tells us this is a rare exception.
So how do you handle the whole notion of, the breaking of the Torah and creating a second set of Torah, which apparently is, more easy for us to live with, and the whole idea of the 13 midot that comes out of it? Is that also part of Hashem's plan, or is it a second best because of our actions?
So you're asking really interesting questions. And truth is, it's not the first time that it happened. You go back to the end of Parshat Breshit. And the end of Parshat Breshit, I read the words that Hashem gave us, right? Not the way other people try to reinterpret the words. The end of Parshat Breshit says that Hashem was frustrated, disappointed with the way people turned out. And he regretted having created people.
Which in itself is an amazing idea. How can Hashem, who's beyond time, regret anything?
Right? But that's what the Chumash says. Vayinachem Hashem ki asar ta'adam ba'aretz. God regretted having created humans on this earth. Vayit atzev elibo. And God was pained in his heart. Right? Whatever that happens to mean. But apparently it is possible. And I happen to think, and this is a topic for a much, much longer conversation. But I think that's sort of built in to the creation. It's built into humanity. It's built into the way Hashem creates people, I'll just say it like this, okay? If Hashem wanted to create a perfect world, he could have. And it would have been really boring. It is the equivalent of I know a little bit about computer programming. So I could write a program that flashes on the screen every 3 seconds. You are awesome. And how meaningful is that? Right? It's pointless. The angels can be singing in heaven, you are awesome, all the time, 24/7, for all of eternity. And all of that is completely meaningless. The one meaningful thing that can happen in this universe is for somebody who doesn't have to, for somebody who isn't pre-programmed to say that, to say, Hashem, thank you. Hashem, Hagadol, Hagibor, V'Hanorah. That moment is the greatest moment in the history of the world. Because that means that we have come to appreciate Hashem without being forced to do that. But in order for that choice to be a real choice, that means that there has to be a possibility that we're not going to do that. And a real possibility that we're not going to do that. That, by the way, is the Eitz Hada'at Tov Ra. The Eitz Hada'at Tov Ra is what gives us the possibility to do Tov and Ra. If there's no possibility for Ra, then Tov is completely meaningless.
So according to your philosophy, was it correct for us to have eaten from that so that we can...
But again, I don't want to go there right now. But if we... Let's just assume the reality in this world is, right, in order for good to be meaningful, there has to be the possibility for bad. And Hashem creating people knows that there has to be a possibility for bad, which means he has to understand and accept that people might actually choose that. And that's why Hashem has infinite patience. He gave us Tselem Elokim. That Tselem Elokim will hopefully impel us more towards the Tov. We have to work on it. It doesn't happen by itself. You have to exercise that muscle called Tselem Elokim, right? But Hashem is really hopeful for us as individuals, as a nation, as humanity, to be able to come to a place where we will say, wow, Hashem, you're awesome.
Very good.
And because of that, so if Hashem wanted to do it, he could create a perfect world. According to Chazal, he actually did. He created a perfect world and it didn't last. Because people aren't perfect. He created people imperfect. So a perfect world with imperfect people doesn't work. So the first set of tablets, the first set of luchot that Moshe got at Har Sinai, they were perfect. They were divine. Hashem created the stones in heaven. He carved the stones in heaven. They belong in heaven. But they never made it down to earth intact because we are imperfect. They had to be broken. There was no way that they could have survived because they were given to humans. The second set of luchot are very different. The second set of luchot are a partnership. Moshe, you carve the tablets. You bring them up, and I'll inscribe them. It's a partnership. It's a marriage of Hashem's work and our work. They're not perfect. They're certainly not as perfect as the first ones, but they come down intact and they can work.
So what would you say would be the purpose of creating a perfect world, knowing that the imperfect human cannot sustain it? I mean, that sounds like a setup to me.
That part certainly is a setup. It's the world that can't exist. But what it does is it gives us the model of what we can aspire to.
But how valuable is that if we can't reach there? What's the point of having a a goal to aspire to if you can never reach it?
Because if you have high goals, you can certainly get a lot further than you are now. If you don't have high goals, if you don't know what the model is, so you have nowhere to turn, nowhere to go. So we have a world that's ideal and perfect, but it exists in theory only. Right? And that's when Chazal, and I know you wanted to talk about Parshat Teruma, and we're in lots of different places here, but when Chazal say that he wanted, and Rashi quotes it in the beginning of Perek Beit in Sefer Breshit, Chazal said that Hashem wanted to create the world with Midat Hadin, and saw that it couldn't survive. And that's Perek Aleph of Sefer Breshit. Perek Aleph of Sefer Breshit is a perfect world. It's a world of Kitov. Perek Beit of Sefer Breshit is a world of Lotov. Lotov Hayota Adam Levado. This isn't working right. That's not working right. Right? So it's the world of Kitov, which is the perfect world. That's the world that's created by Elokim, Midat Hadin. It's perfect. But that's not real. And for a world to be real, right, it has to have Hashem Elokim. It has to have Midat Chesed, Midat HaRachamim, that moderates din in some kind of way. And the same thing is true with Luchot, right? Chazal say, and I think it was the Beit HaLevi who says something. He actually sharpens this very, very nicely. He talks about the two sets of Luchot. Says the first set of Luchot had Torah Sheba'al Peh written in them. What does that mean?
It means there's no space for man to do anything.
There's no space for people.
Yeah.
It means it's all fixed. And it can't work for humans because humans need that. So Hashem, the second set of Luchot, he says, Torah Sheba'al Peh was actually Ba'al Peh. And Torah Sheba'al Peh allows for lots of human interaction, creativity, flexibility. Chazal interpret and reinterpret and reshape things. And we've been doing that for many, many, many thousands of years. And it's a world where you have Torah Shebichtav and Torah Sheba'al Peh that work together. So that's a Torah that can actually work for humanity.
I see lots of difficulties in giving a man partnership, and we end up agreeing to do things that against Hashem's will.
When you say difficulties, what do you mean by that?
I mean, isn't that a conflict to Hashem? He's given us partnership. He's given us responsibility, and clearly, it could be that we decide collectively as a species to do things against His will. As a result,
that's a risk Hashem takes, but it's a risk that I think Hashem thinks is worthwhile.
Mm-hmm.
The same way that when we send our kids out into the world, I know that my kids are going to make mistakes. I have to make sure that, to the best of my ability, that I prepare them so that they don't make mistakes that are going to be devastating.
Mm.
But they make mistakes. Everybody does.
And I guess part of that preparation is to know how to fix things. That becomes a very important part of life.
Right. To know how to fix things and to know how to self-reflect.
Mm.
Right. So sometimes, Hashem lets us know that we need to self-reflect. And sometimes we're good at figuring out ourselves, in our human interactions. Those who are honest with themselves know when they've done something not nice to somebody else and they feel bad about it.
Yes.
And then they right, the really mature ones can go and say, hi, I'm really sorry. I said something and I shouldn't have said that. So we learn how to do that in our human interactions, and we can learn to do the same thing in our interactions with Hashem as well. And that is the kind of mature people, the grown-up people, grown-up Jews, grown-up humans that Hashem wants us to become. Right. So that we'll make mistakes, and then we'll say, and Hashem is willing to tolerate the mistakes, particularly if we're willing to take responsibility for the fact that, oh, I messed up. That was not so good. I'm really sorry.
That's what we learned from Adam. I mean, Hashem wasn't upset with him for eating it. He was upset with him for denying why he ate it, or. So okay, so that's really helpful. I've been wanting to have this conversation with a rabbi for a long time. So thank you for allowing me to ramble on. Going back to the parasha, the curious thing about this is that it was a temporary housing, a temporary setup, and we have so many pesukim dedicated to the minute detail of something that no longer exists, and it's puzzling for me not only that it's in such detail, but we have a repetition of it all again in the last two parashat of Shemot. What's your take on that?
So those are two very, very different questions, and I'll try to address each of those. I actually recently published a book on Sefer Shemot, in which I speak about a lot of these things. It's actually a very important piece of. Do
you have the book there with you?
I know. You know what? If you hold on for 10 seconds, I'll show you.
Please, it would be nice to see it in reality.
Okay, book published by Koren Magid Press. I don't know. Here we go.
Oh, that's better.
All right.
Okay.
The title is Exodus: The Genesis of God's People.
Great.
And
maybe you can send a link to getting the book. We can put it on the podcast for the.
I can certainly do that. And one of the things that I've been, this is something I've been working on for on and off for 40 years. But the details of the Mishkan are actually, I believe, very, very significant. And they have symbolic meaning. I'll give you a few examples.
Please.
First of all, the dimensions of the Mishkan, right? So, yeah, they're all over the place. If you take a look at the Mishkan, so if you take a look just at the courtyard itself, so the courtyard itself is 100 amot long and 50 amot wide. It means it's twice as long as it is wide. It's a 2-to-1 ratio. The Kodesh section of the Mishkan has exactly the same ratio. It's 20 amot long, 10 amot wide, and 10 amot high. Okay? And then if you take a look at the Kelim, right, with the exception of the Menorah, so all of the Kelim have the same dimensions, except that there are halves that are added, right? And if you take a look at the Ibn Ezra actually suggests that the halves are because you have to account for the thickness of the walls. So the halves, that when you remove the halves, so the Mizbeach HaZahav is 2x1. The Aron is 2x1. Okay. And then we have the question about the Mizbeach, the large Mizbeach outside. And here's a really interesting thing, right? It's not only Ibn Ezra who noticed it, but Chazal noticed it also, because when the Torah tells us the dimensions of the outer Mizbeach, it says it's 5 amot long, 5 amot wide, and 3 amot high. And Chazal say, no, it's not 3 amot high, it's 10. Where'd the 10 come from? Because 10 is double the 5. They looked at the ratio that exists in all the other kelim and in the courtyard and the building of the Mishkan, and they said it's not possible that the outer Mizbeach has a different ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And even though the Torah says it's only 3 amotai, they say, no, it can't be. It can't be true. It must be 10 amotai because it has to have the same ratio. What's that about? Right? So just imagine it, two squares. Okay, here's one square that's 1 by 1. Here's another square that's 1 by 1. One of these represents us, Am Yisrael. One of us represents Hashem. And you put them together. And that becomes conceptually the framework for the Mishkan. The dimensions say this is a place where Am Yisrael and Hashem meet.
I see.
It's the meeting place. And that's V'shachanti b'tocham. I'm going to dwell amongst you there. So the dimensions, just the numbers. We haven't spoken about what they're made out of or anything else, but the numbers themselves say this is a building, this is a complex that represents the meeting place between Hashem and Am Yisrael. They're partners in this brit, in this covenant, and they need a place to meet. Okay, so that's one example. Here's a completely different example. All right, and you'll see how it conveys the same kind of idea. If you've ever seen a picture of the way people imagine the shulchan, right? So shulchan, we think of a table, but it actually has on it shelves and right, these movable shelves and the racks and the whole. It is the most artificial thing that you can imagine. There's nothing in nature that looks like that, right? And truth is, what goes onto the shulchan? What goes onto the shulchan is something that is a human product. Bread. Bread is a human product. Hashem makes grain. We take the grain and transform it into bread. Bread symbolizes what humans can do with Hashem's creation to make it even better.
Right.
Right? That's bread. Facing the shulchan, you have the menorah. What is the menorah? Menorah looks like a tree. And that's why the menorah doesn't have dimensions. Because it's meant to represent, in the Torah gives no dimensions for the menorah. Why? Because the menorah is supposed to represent something that's alive and growing, right? It's perfectly natural. What goes into the menorah? Shemen zayit zach. Shemen zayit zach. There are different kinds of oil that you produce, right? So today, when you get olive oil, it comes from presses that crush the olives and the pits, right? You need a lot of pressure to squeeze the oil out of the pits. What if you just took a bunch of olives and piled them up one on top of another? The weight of the olives on themselves produces the first oil. That's Shemen Zayit Zach. Shemen Zayit Zach is a pure nature. The menorah represents the world that Hashem created. That's nature. The shulchan represents the world that people created. The bread. And the menorah and the shulchan are always facing each other. If you take a look in the Chumash, and you'll see this half a dozen times, you'll see it in Sefer Shemot a few times. You'll find it later on in Sefer Bamidbar. You'll find it. The menorah is supposed to be facing the shulchan, nochach, right? And the menorah is supposed to light up, right? Light up what faces it, which means that Hashem's work in the world and human work in the world are supposed to face each other. They're supposed to parallel each other. So we have all these details. And it turns out that for many of them, the details actually represent what the Mishkan is all about. I was 2 weeks ago. I was in England, and I went to visit Windsor Castle. And you walk through the castle, and they have entire rooms that are devoted to the cutlery and the plates and the servingware there that the kings used. And they spent enough money on their servingware to be able to feed half of the country for a year. It's I'm not going to comment on that, but right. Yeah. But they chose those for a reason. Those things represented, right? they represented what the royalty was all about. Well, this building, right? This building represents what it's supposed to accomplish. And what it accomplishes is it is the meeting place between Hashem and Am Yisrael. There's more. I'll give you one more example. Okay, very, very, and this is just like a very superficial kind of review. The Aron. So the Aron has two kruvim on top of it.
Yes,
They're
which is bizarre because, we were told not to have any images of anything.
Right? It's got their outstretched wings. What does that evoke? The outstretched wings. When you see a bird and the bird has its wings outstretched, what does that tell you about the bird?
It's going to take off.
It's about to take off. That's exactly right. So the Aron is supposed to be this. All right, it's the seat of the covenant. It's the seat of the Brit, because Luchot HaBrit sit inside the Aron. Right? It is the place where Hashem's presence can be most intensely and acutely felt in the Mishkan. And yet, the symbol for the Aron is that it can leave at any moment. It can take off. We don't own Hashem. He may have decided to bring his presence within us, but there's no guarantee that it's going to be there. We don't control that. We have to live always with the sense that Hashem could leave at any point. This was a classic mistake, right? Meaning when Shlomo HaMelech built the Beit HaMikdash, right? This was exactly what Hashem was concerned about. You're going to build a house and put my name on it, and it's a permanent house. Right. The Mishkan, as you introduced it earlier, and correctly so, is supposed to be temporary, right? Beit HaMikdash is a permanent house. And Hashem is nervous about attaching his name to a permanent house because it lets people think like he's always going to be there. But no. And that's what he tells Shlomo. You look in Sefer Malachim, Perek Chet, Perek Zayin, Perek Chet. That's exactly what he tells Shlomo. He said, I'll tell you what, my name will always be here if you always keep the mitzvot. Right? There's no guarantee. And later on, when you go to Sefer Yirmiyah, and Yirmiyah tells them the Beit HaMikdash is going to be destroyed, and the people said, no, it's not going to happen. Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem, Heichal Hashem. This is God's house. He'll never leave it. So Yirmiyah was aware of the problem. Shlomo was aware of the problem, right? Hashem was aware of the problem when he told them to build him a Mishkan in Parshat Teruma. And the symbol of the Mishkan is, you don't own me. You can't force me to stay here. My presence here is really dependent on how you behave. So the symbols of the Mishkan are profound and powerful. And those same ideas, we may not have a Mishkan, but the same ideas are, they drive our lives today. I can't do something and automatically expect that it's going to produce particular results in Shamayim. Mm-hmm. We have no guarantees.
Yeah, I really appreciate that, as I do the idea that our presence in Israel is not guaranteed either. It's dependent on how we behave.
Yeah.
So how do you respond to the repetition of the last two parashiyot then?
So this is going to bring me full circle back to what we spoke about earlier, right? Earlier, your assumption that you shared based on Rashi's take is that the Mishkan was Hashem's reaction to Chet HaEgel. And I pushed back and I said, the Ramban sees it differently. The Mishkan was lechatchila. That was part of the original design. That this is the symbol of Hashem's relationship with Am Yisrael. And it's the most appropriate thing that could possibly happen after the events at Har Sinai. Ramban, he says a lot about this. He says it's like a portable Har Sinai that you can take with you. Right? That is the most beautiful thing. It's like, you have a wedding. Well, the wedding is not what you wait for. It's the married life is what you wait for. Right? So Har Sinai was the wedding. Hashem is not interested in the wedding as much as he's interested in the married life with Am Yisrael. Right? So the Mishkan is the symbol of the married life with Am Yisrael that's going to continue onwards. It's a portable Har Sinai we take with us. Chet HaEgel threatened the relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When you read the Torah the way it's written, so Chet HaEgel threatens that relationship. And you take a look, for example, when Hashem tells Moshe, what's the worst thing he threatens? The worst thing he threatens is Lo e'eleh b'kirbecha, I'm not going to be amongst you.
Yes.
Which is the reverse of what he tells them in the beginning of Teruma, right? I want to dwell amongst you. And then the worst thing that he could say is, I'm not going with you. And reaction of Bnei Yisrael, they go into Avelus. Right? What do we do? And Hashem tells Moshe, I want you guys to leave. And Moshe says, I'm not leaving without you. And you've got a long negotiation there between Moshe and Hashem, right? And in the end, it's not 100% clear what the result of that negotiation is.
It's a bit ambiguous,
right? So what happens afterwards is that Moshe goes and what you spoke about the repetition. So the repetition, Vayakel Pekude, is not really repetition. It's repetition of the details, but it's actually a description of what they did, right? Truma Tetzaveh is what they were supposed to do. Those are the instructions. Vayakel Pekude is what they actually did. They followed the instructions to a T. And number one, why is that important for the Torah to tell us that? Because at Chet HaEgel, they didn't.
Mm-hmm.
So we have the contrast there between where they messed up and where they said, oh, no. We're going to do exactly. In fact, if you take a look at Parshat Pekude, there's a phrase that appears, I think, 21 times in Parshat Pekude, Kasher Tziva Hashem et Moshe.
Yes. Yeah.
They do it exactly the way they were told because they were terrified. Did our actions chase Hashem away that he's not going to want to be with us anymore? And that's why it's important to repeat all of those things precisely to tell us they did exactly as they were told. The other reason why it's important to repeat those things precisely is to look at what's not so precisely the same. And there are things that are different. And the things that are different are the things that indicate that they didn't know what the result of building the Mishkan was going to be.
Could you explain that a bit more?
Yeah. The design, when Hashem tells Moshe to build a Mishkan, he gives him all the instructions. He tells him what to follow and what to do, right? And the purpose of this, V'asuli mikdash v'shachanti b'tocham, I will dwell amongst them. That was the goal. Moshe is not sure that building after Chet HaEgel, he's not sure that v'shachanti b'tocham is going to happen.
I see.
So, for example, Hashem, when he talks about the Aron, he says, build the Aron, and that's where I'm going to speak to you. When it comes time to building the Mishkan, Moshe doesn't use those words. He doesn't know that Hashem is going to speak to him from the Aron.
Interesting.
And there are lots of other things, small little details that change. I mean, it's not the details that change, but it's the purposes. Moshe, for example, never tells Bnei Yisrael, build a Mishkan for Hashem so that he will dwell amongst you. He can't promise that. He doesn't know if that's going to happen or not. So Vayakel Pekude, when we read it in shul, we sit or we read it for ourselves, it sounds really boring. We're hearing all the same stuff all over again. But for them, this was the greatest tension that you can imagine. We're going to do this. We don't know if it's going to work, but we have to do everything we possibly can to make sure that it does. So those are parashiyot that are filled with unbelievable tension. And it's incredibly powerful.
Beautiful. I'm grateful for you because it's always been a very boring part of the experience for me. So thank you for that. I wanted to dwell on this pasuk that you mentioned. It's actually in verse 8, they shall make me a sanctuary for me so that I will dwell amongst them. Meaning dwell amongst them in their hearts, presumably. So I'm just curious why we need the temporary structure for Hashem to dwell in our hearts. Could he not have just decided to dwell in our hearts, or could we not have done something to invite him into our hearts anyway?
So I'm going to just push back again on your initial assumption. Right? What you offered is a Hasidic reading of a Shachanti B'tocham.
Right.
The Hasidic reading is beautiful and very meaningful, and that is what's meaningful, in the absence of a Mishkan, the absence of a Beit HaMikdash. So the Hasidic reading is what we sort of hold on to, right? Because, but he actually meant the real thing, not the imaginary one, right? Rabbi Nachman Breslov, who wrote that Bilvavi Mishkan Evne. So Bilvavi Mishkan Evne, that's right, that beautiful song. So that's the Hasidic reading of these psukim. But Hashem initially intended it not as a Hasidic reading, but as a real reading. I will dwell amongst you.
So what does that mean, in your opinion?
I think it means that Hashem is going to let us know that he is partnering with us. He's going to remind us on a regular basis that we are his partners in this world. He chose us to accomplish a mission, and he's going to be there with us to help us accomplish that mission.
How would you define that mission for us?
So I would say the mission in the most general sense, it's not a personal mission, it's a national mission. It's Am Yisrael. It's not 600,000 individuals who stood there at Har Sinai. It was a nation. Hashem's brit was with a nation, and the mission is to bring Hashem's message to the rest of humanity. It's sort of like we're familiar with the midrashim about Avraham, with his tent open on all four sides and inviting in people and teaching them who Hashem is. Well, Avram is an individual. Hashem thought that was a nice thing, right? And let's now replicate that on a national level. So we, as Hashem's partners, we are there to bring Hashem's message primarily of tzedakah and mishpat. Those are the core principles. But you could expand that, right? Tzedakah and mishpat, you could expand that to the way we treat other people, and to recognizing that there is a single God in the universe. I think that would sort of encapsulate the core message of what Hashem really is hoping that we will bring to the rest of humanity.
Very good. And so my last question is really at the beginning of the pasuk, when we talk about in chapter 25, verse 2, let them take from me a portion from every man whose heart motivates him. You shall give me a portion. And the question that everybody asks is, why does it say tikhu instead of titnu? Why does it say give me, take from me instead of give to me? I'm just wondering what your take on that was.
So I've struggled with that for many, many years. I've had many thoughts about that on and off over the course of the years, which means that whatever I'm going to say is something that I might regret saying in another week or
Or
two,
might change.
or might change in another week or two. I think there are two possibilities. One, on the simplest level, is vikhu, we translate as take. Maybe it means to accept. Maybe it means only accept the gifts from the people who really want to give it.
Say that again. Only accept the gift.
Only accept the gifts from those who want to give it. Kol ish asher yidvenu libo, from anybody whose heart has really moved him.
Right.
That's who you should accept the gifts from.
Nice.
But don't take it from people who are just giving it because everybody else is doing it.
Very nice.
So I think that's on the simplest level. We could certainly say that. In a broader sense, when I read this and I sort of it sparks a whole different set of thinking that doesn't necessarily help me in understanding the pasuk in the Chumash, but in general, I think I think one of the tensions that we always feel, and Chazal felt this too, you see it very clearly when you have the discussions within Chazal about whether to legislate tefillah or not. Right? Meaning, before Chazal did that, there was no such thing as formalized tefillah, no set times for tefillah, no set texts for tefillah. And when they did it, it was clear that not everybody agreed. Right? You look in the Mishnayot and Pirkei Avot, and they'll tell you that not everybody agreed. There were those who thought it was a really awful idea, because if you legislate tefillah, then it looks like it does in most shuls today. Right? And so there's a tension. There's a real tension between things that are authentically meaningful and things that we do because we are required to do so. And the legislation of tefillah, I think, is one of the great examples of where you see that tension. We want tefillah to be meaningful, and therefore you have to do it. Once you tell me I have to do it, it's hard to make it meaningful. People struggle with kavanah. If you didn't have to do it, you wouldn't struggle with kavanah so much, because you would only do it when you really meant it.
Right.
And yet they felt like there was a need to legislate it. So there's this tension, and it's a real tension, right? Because the flip side of that is, well, if you legislate it, at least you create a formal structure for relationship. Yeah, I gained a whole, in the last 2-3 years, I've gained a very deep appreciation for the people who go to shul every morning. They daven in 22 minutes flat, right? Which I don't like. Personally, I don't like it. And yet, these are people who do that every single day for their entire lives. They show up. They show up for Shachrit every single day. There's a profound sense of commitment and structure that comes with that. And it's the commitment of showing up that is profoundly meaningful. The words might not be meaningful. They're probably thinking about their business or their kids or the fight they have with their wife or whatever. While they're busy mumbling all the words aren't meaningful, but they show up. They're there all the time. So the legislating that actually created something very, very powerful that wouldn't have existed otherwise. So we have this tension between the need to do things voluntarily and the real value in being structured into certain things. And that structured relationship, the kid who calls home every Friday afternoon to say Shabbat Shalom to his parents. whether they have something to say or don't have something to say, whether they're angry or not, right? They'll call home. That says a lot right there. You show up, you're there. And that is a profound relationship with Hashem. Now, and they won't miss.
Well, I've absolutely thoroughly enjoyed discussing all these ideas with you. I do hope you'll come back and bless us with another session before the end of the year, B'ezrat Hashem. But I want to leave you with a question I leave all my guests, and that is, what do you define as your personal mission in life?
Are you asking me to think about that or to respond?
Respond.
So
off the cuff, on one leg.
I'll tell you two stories. Okay? And then you'll draw your own conclusions from those two stories. My father was a diamond cutter. He wanted me to go into his business. He trained me. I worked for him for a while. I decided it wasn't for me. I broke his heart. I also trained to be a computer programmer back in the days. And I had a job waiting for me when I was graduating college. And at the time, I started getting involved a little bit in some informal Jewish educational work with kids. And it didn't take long for me to come to the conclusion that Am Yisrael didn't need more diamond cutters, and Am Yisrael didn't need more computer programmers. I might have been wrong about that, but Am Yisrael, that was my conclusion 40 some odd years ago. Am Yisrael needed people who could relate to kids and take the Torah and translate it into something that kids could connect to. So you asked me what my role in life is. So that is what drove me to choose the career that I did. I felt like this was something that I could do and something that was profoundly necessary. And I just decided that I was going to do it because it was needed. That's what Hashem needed for me to do, and that's what Am Yisrael needed for me to do. So that's one story. The second story took place about 7 or 8 years ago. I don't remember exactly. I was teaching in a yeshiva, and I remember a conversation that I had with one of my colleagues. We were just having an informal conversation. We were talking about our students, what we were hoping for our students, and the message. And he was telling me how frustrating it is because he really wants his students to feel like they are Avdei Hashem. And I reacted that's not one of my goals, and that I don't experience that. And we decided to actually have a public conversation about this. Once we had this, right, where he really promoted in a very passionate way, and a very beautiful way, his sense that his mission in life was to be an Eved Hashem. And I tried to communicate that my understanding was that my goal was to be Hashem's partner.
Nice differentiation.
And there were a lot of practical kinds of implications to this. So those are the two stories, and then you can draw your own conclusions about.
Thank you. I'm so eager to read one of your books. If I had to read one book of yours, which one would you recommend me to read?
If you had to read one book, I would say I wrote a book in the same series as that book I showed you on Sefer Shmot. I wrote a book on Sefer Bereshit called Genesis from Creation to Covenant, also published by Koren Magid. Let's see if I can get
Put it in the middle of the. It's out of focus. Yeah.
I'm trying to get the camera to focus on it rather than my face.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not doing such
Okay.
a good job.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Great. Well, Bereshit is one of my favorite books, so I will grab a copy of that somewhere and enjoy reading it. It's been an absolute pleasure to
My pleasure
converse with
speaking
you,
with
Rabbi.
you. Thank you for
And
inviting me.
and really, may you be blessed to continue your very important work of making the Torah meaningful for the youth of our nation. I do believe that that is a core and very essential requirement. And I'm very happy to see people of your caliber taking on that challenge. So may you be successful, and may many children and many adults read your works, B'ezrat Hashem.
Thank you.
Thank
Pleasure
you
to
so
meet you.
much.
Pleasure to speak.
Thank you, and we'll hopefully invite you to come back on, B'ezrat Hashem.